He has a name that most people know, but they don't know the person. They know the legend, the gunslinger, the friend of Wyatt Earp, the man who was at the OK Corral. But who was Doc Holliday really? He was not just a man who knew how to use a gun. He was a man who was already dead when he started to live. In the spring of 1873, in the mountains of Georgia, a young 21-year-old physician-dentist named John Henry Holliday began coughing up blood. Not once. Not the following spring, constantly. Blood on white handkerchiefs, blood on the pillow, blood that no education, no respectable family, no amount of intelligence and refinement could stop. The doctors pronounced sentence without hesitation: tuberculosis. The consumption, as they called it then. A death that was not quick death. It was slow decay. Degeneration. His lungs were disintegrating from the inside, and there was nothing to be done. No remedy, no surgery, no prayer that would change the outcome. He had perhaps 5 years, perhaps less. His father wanted him to stay home, to rest, to accept God's will with Christian resignation. Most would have done it, would have gone back to Dallas, where he was beginning his practice as a dentist, and would have lain down in a bed to wait. Doc Holliday looked death in the face and refused. He sold his practice. He picked up a revolver. And in 1874, he disappeared to the West, that vast, brutal place, completely lawless, where nobody questioned where you came from and nobody cared how you died, only when. Because in the West, death was democratic. It came for the judge and the criminal, the landowner and the vagrant, the brave and the coward. Doc already had a death guaranteed, so why not choose the rest? The following years were a blur of mining towns: Georgetown in Colorado, Las Vegas in New Mexico. Small rooms, poker tables, cheap whiskey that burned on the way down, occasionally a tooth to pull when there was someone with enough money to pay. But this was not life. It was waiting. Refined waiting, perhaps, but waiting still, until he met Wyatt Earp. It was in Tombstone, Arizona, in 1880. Two broken men recognized each other in the dust of the main street. Wyatt carried the weight of his past, men dead by his hand, decisions that haunted him, the burden of trying to impose order on a city that did not want order. Doc carried the weight of his body, lungs that were failing, energy that was slipping away, each breath a promise his body could not keep. It was not ordinary friendship. It was mutual recognition between two men who knew that they could die at any moment, one by violence, the other by biology, and therefore were free to do what they believed was right. What they believed was right, absolutely. When Wyatt began to clash with the Clantons, the men who controlled the smuggling, the cattle rustling, the violence in Tombstone, he had Doc. And Doc, disposable, dispensable, already dead inside, was not afraid. A doctor named Tobias Goodman examined Doc during this time and afterward wrote, "I never saw a man so sick, inflamed by purpose. He burned. There was fire in his eyes, and curiously, his illness seemed to make him more alive, not less." More alive while dying. This is important because you need to understand the quality of presence that Doc Holliday brought to those months in Tombstone. It was not despair. It was not the flight of a man running from death. It was the opposite. It was a man who had accepted death and discovered that this acceptance created a clarity that most people never know. The nearness of death made him precise, intentional, dangerous. A man afraid of dying hesitates, calculates, keeps a margin of safety. But a man who is already dying, who knows exactly how much time he has, who sees himself in mirrors each day more thin, more translucent, that man moves different, acts different. A bullet that could kill him was no longer a threat. It was just another end among many ends already guaranteed. The Clantons tested Wyatt constantly. Small challenges, insults, provocations. They wanted to see how far he would go. And on October 26th, 1881, in an empty lot near the OK Corral, everyone found out. It was not an epic gunfight. It was not as films portray it. It was only a few seconds. 30 people or more present. More people were killed in bar fights in Kansas. But those few seconds, that moment when Doc and Wyatt and his brothers faced the Clantons, marked everything and everyone for the rest of their lives. Doc was coughing up blood when he entered that lot. His shirt was wet. His lungs were already failing. And he went forward anyway because Wyatt was his friend, because it was right, because he had 2 years, perhaps less, and would not waste any of them hiding. Then the consequences came like infection. The Clantons hunted him. Friends were killed. Bill Leonard, Frank McClory, men that Doc had made enemies simply by standing beside Wyatt. The accusations began. Perhaps Doc was harboring murderers. Perhaps he had killed innocent men. The next 5 years were a series of trials, acquittals, death of allies, nights sleeping in rooms with a revolver under the pillow because he knew a man wanted him dead. Wyatt left Tombstone. He went away. He left the city behind him. Doc stayed, because he was already dead inside, because he had nothing left to lose, because someone needs to be a witness that the right choices were made. He stayed while tuberculosis progressed. He stayed while his lungs died. He stayed while his former allies were cut down one by one, killed in vengeances he could not prevent. Until finally, in 1887, his body asked for mercy. He was lying in a room at the Glenwood Springs Hotel in Colorado. Terminal. His lungs no longer worked. He was coughing constantly, each breath a miner's labor. The doctor came and went. The nurse changed the blood-stained clothes. Death was no longer near. It was immediate. It was happening, cell by cell, in that room. And there is a story, small, neglected, lost among the newspapers that barely noticed his death, about his final moments. The nurse said that in the final hours Doc asked to see his feet, asked for his boots. Those worn shoes in which he had walked from Texas to Arizona, through deserts, through conflicts, through each day stolen from death. He looked at them for a long time. "Funny," he said. Just that. Nobody knows what Doc Holliday found funny in that moment. Perhaps it was the complete irony, all that time in the West preparing to die, and he ended up in a bed, in a room, surrounded by the comforts that the civilization he had fled could offer. Perhaps it was a thought about how much he had lived in so little time. Or perhaps it was just a strange thing you think when your mind is beginning to fail, when oxygen is low. The truth is that nobody will ever know, and perhaps that is the point. Here is what the books do not tell. Doc Holliday was a failure by the standard of his own world. He left a respectable dental practice to die of tuberculosis. He did not become rich. He did not become famous. His name is remembered only because he stood beside Wyatt Earp. He died at 36 years old with destroyed lungs, without children, without conventional legacy, in an anodyne room where nobody recorded his final words. If you measure a life by length, by success, by possession, by security, Doc Holliday is a warning, not an inspiration. He is a man who wasted his gifts, who could have had a respectable life and threw it away. But there is another way to measure a life. There is a quality that you cannot count in years or dollars or dental patients treated. It is the quality of presence, the quality of knowing what matters and doing only that. Doc Holliday had that quality. He was born with tuberculosis, and it taught him to live. Most people live as if they had infinite time. They postpone. They wait. They postpone the word of love for when everything is perfect. They postpone the work that matters for when they earn more money. They postpone life because they believe they will always have next year, next decade, next chance. They let small people remain small. They let fear drive them. Doc did not, because he knew, not because he was special, not because he was braver than other men. He knew because his body forced him to know. His doctor told him the truth. You will die in a few years. not in 70. And that truth, which most people think would destroy someone, actually set him free. We are all dying, of course. You were not given an expiration date, but your body has a thermostat. It is degrading now. Doctors do not say because there is no reason to scare you, but biologically you are on the clock. You always were, you will be. The question that Doc Holliday answered silently, only through how he lived, is this: do you need to know your date to live as if you knew it? The men in Doc's day, reading about him, witnessing his infamous gunfight at the OK Corral, saw cowardice in his death. They saw a man standing because he had no choice, a man desperate waiting for the bullets that would end the suffering. But those who really knew him, Wyatt, the nurse, Dr. Goodman, said something different. They said they saw a man who had accepted the worst that could happen and continued to live in a way that most never can, because most are still afraid, still waiting, still guarding their words, their energy, their courage for a day that may never come. Doc lived each day as if it were his last, not because it was a philosophy he had read in a book. He lived that way because he knew it, and when you know, you do not need courage. Courage is for people who have hope. Doc had acceptance. And that is what made him unstoppable. He never went back to Baltimore. He never had a respectable dental practice. He never had a safe, small, civilized life as his father wanted. Instead, he died at 36 years old, coughing up blood in a hotel room, his last thoughts about worn boots and irony, and no man who knew him ever forgot him. The history books say that Doc Holliday was a gunslinger, a killer, a failure whose death went unnoticed in the newspapers. And that is true. Technically, it is all true. But there is another truth that the books never managed to capture in words. It is the truth that you only know when you have been near someone who really lived. Someone who had given up waiting for permission, for perfect timing, for right circumstances. Someone who had accepted death and discovered that this acceptance transformed every moment into gold. Doc Holliday did not live a long life, but he lived a life that mattered. And for a man who was condemned to tuberculosis at 21 years old, in a deathbed at 36, with his lungs collapsing and nothing but worn boots to tell his story, perhaps that was more than enough. Perhaps it was everything.